Hello and welcome to the Paper Prototypes podcast. I'm here with Benjamin, the developer of Heroes Hour. Benjamin, how's it going?
Hello, it's going quite fine. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So Benjamin, why don't you tell me how did you get started in game development?
I mean, it's a really weird story, to be honest. As in, it's just sort of always been a thing that I wanted to do. As a kid, growing up playing games, I was like, I at some point want to make my own video game, and I was rather um, insistent about it. As in, I had no idea what was up with the programming and stuff, so I started out actually making games in PowerPoint presentations. It's a horrible program for doing that, but I just eventually found better programs, and it was always a hobby thing. Um, and in some strange way, I've come back to it. I went away from it, and at some point, I actually made a video game, and that's basically the story.
So is this your first commercial project?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I've had thousands of projects. Most of them are for like a day or a week or something like that, but nothing that's been close to this scale. Um, I think there's some old published video games, but nothing commercial.
And what was your biggest inspiration for why you wanted to make Heroes Hour?
I mean, it's the easiest answer to that question is just to say, hey, I used to really like Heroes Mind Magic, and I made Heroes Mind Magic in a different fashion. The a bit more long-winded explanation is that I actually have been doing like several years of different prototypes of different gameplay concepts, all of which were about some intermediate between auto battling and having some sense of control over what was going on. And this long sort of creative exploration of the concept space ended up with me at some point having this idea, oh, hey, I should do this. Very concretely, actually, the Heroes Hour game is based on some assets that are made by an artist known as Alexander Makarov. Um, they are freely available for other people to also find, and me finding those assets were what inspired the whole process to start. I was like, I was doing something different. I saw these assets. I was like, hey, maybe I should try to do this concept, and I did that. It started really easily because all the assets were there in the first place. As time went on, of course, I did my own assets and stuff like that. But that's the very concrete point where the inspiration was brought up.
And for anyone that's not aware of Heroes Hour, what exactly is Heroes Hour as a game?
Heroes Hour is partly a turn-based strategy game. Um, it brings a lot of it takes a lot of creative inspiration from various old school games. But the new spin on it is that you have real-time battles where you do not have a full-scale control of your units. As in, the idea is that when you go into battle, everything will be simulated without you touching anything at all, like everything being an auto battle. Um, it's not quite that anymore. Like you actually can take quite a lot of control over the units and casting spells and making other orders during combat. But the concept is that you don't have to worry about that. The old school turn-based strategy games were wonderful. Big inspirations. I love those. But my issue with them, especially as I grew older, is that they take a very long time to play. Especially Heroes of Might and Magic, which is the greatest inspiration, where you spend like several hours, even if you're sort of a fast player, just getting through the easy, basic fights in the beginning of the game. Just because you need to do a lot of clicking to order everything around, even though it's not always very engaging. So that's why I try to use auto battles to sort of speed up that aspect of the game, while the strategic overworld management is still turn-based. Yeah, so it's that sort of balance.
And Heroes Hour is a really feature dense game. How do you keep track of the various systems and interactions going on?
I mean, um, uh, the short answer is that I have an Excel sheet, like Google Docs actually, a spreadsheet where I put all the different things. I have like 30 different sheets, each of which has like a list of all the different things. It's a lot of interlocking systems. Each system is sort of self-contained, but they all interact through the basic gameplay mechanics of like going into battle and leaving battle and creating units, these things. There's a lot of ways to like sort of take that system. And throughout the years, I guess it's just piled up to be, as you say, extremely feature dense.
30
It was,
Excel spreadsheets?
I mean, I don't actually think it's an exaggeration. Like, it's a really bothersome to actually work through just because there's way too many. Yeah, so I have like one here for all the units, and I have one here for the way the different units are set up in different towns, and I have one here for a simulation of the chance of a skill proccing that someone asked me to do. Then a list of all the obstacles, and a list of all the skill trees, and a list of all the town screens, and it's just yeah, it's infinite.
So how do you, like, if you want to make like a radical change to a system during development, how do you, like, I'm just trying to rack my head around. So if you make like a change to like the spells with how they work, you'd have to like redo that spreadsheet, but are you also redoing the other spreadsheets that are linked to that one?
Like that's actually a very important part of the game, that every sort of mechanic is sort of self-contained. So I would just have like a single spreadsheet for spells. I would add those. I would, of course, most of these things have to be programmed a lot like within the code itself. Um, but adding spells, for instance, I had the version 2.3 update, which added 40 new spells. That was all work within there. Balance-wise, yeah, it might have mucked up some things elsewhere, but all things being equal, it's not like everything depends extremely much on other things.
So how do you determine the balance of a game like this to make sure that one system doesn't lead to just someone steamrolling the whole game?
I mean, um, at the beginning of the game, I actually spent quite a lot of time with auto balancer things. Like I had a combat simulation set up where it would just spawn random armies and have them fight each other, and then keep track of the win rates of the different units. And then I could adjust, like looking at the different win rates, which units were too strong, which ones should be made weaker. As time went on and I got more of a community engaged, they actually hated the automatic balancing. Apparently, it wasn't very good, according to them. So from there on out, it's actually all been community driven. That being said, luckily it's not a multiplayer game, which means that though balance is important, it's not the end all be all. The most important thing isn't that everything is equal, but that everything is fun and everything has a reason to be used, or a reason to be thought about, at least, like considered. Um, there are a lot of discussions in the community about, like, there's a skill called Devour, which is a very highly scaling skill, as in it's very slow in the beginning, but as the game goes on, it becomes stronger and stronger. And some people are of the opinion that this skill is way too powerful, completely busted. And the rest of the community are like, yeah, but you're talking about if nothing attacks you for 2 weeks in the game. And, at that point, as long as there's even a discussion about whether something is strong or weak, to me, it means it's balanced.
And at what point did the community input really start driving your decision making, or at least start to influence it?
I actually think that happened quite early, like even around the time of version 0.83. I remember at that point I was doing quite a lot of engaging with the community. And since then it's been more and more essential. Like I actually have like a Discord channel, rather active, where at points I have made like channels specifically to gather feedback about balance, and then afterwards actually implementing those balance suggestions if several people agreed on them anyway.
And have you seen any of the videos from a specific YouTuber called the Spiffing Brit?
I mean, yeah. Talking about balance, I mean, his whole gimmick is that everything is completely busted, and it's really, really funny to see the things that he's finding out is busted. Where quite often within the community, at least, you're going like, "Oh yeah, I mean, I guess that's true, but have you seen X or Y instead?" And that's lovely too. Honestly, I think there's a very great overlap between the gameplay design, like my way of engaging with gameplay design, and the Spiffing Brits content, because I love overpowered stuff. I love mechanics and synergies that are completely busted in their own way, but that's the engaging and fun part of the game in a lot of fashions. Um, so these things actually work rather well. Lots of the things that he has pointed out were actually um, meant to be powerful. The really problematic things are the ones that aren't meant to be powerful and which are discovered not necessarily by people like him, but by a lot of people who play the game even more.
So it's you would
I
say
owe
it's oh
quite
sorry.
I owe quite a lot of depth and gratitude to the Spiffing Brit, both for his enthusiasm about the game, but also that he helped bring so many people to the game.
Would you
So I
say
should
that
just say,
was would you say that was one of the biggest bumps in your community?
it was one of the biggest bumps. I think at this point he has done so many videos that yes, he is the biggest influencer when it comes to this game. Just before he did his first video on the game, a different video, a YouTuber named Splattercat also did a video. He has done one more since then, and that's been the other most substantial influence on the game's popularity.
I
Um,
That's actually how I found your video, Splattercat's video. I completely forgot he did a video on your game though.
mhm. So yeah, in some way, also because Spiffing Brit only found the game because of Splattercat. Splattercat is actually the guy who has had the biggest influence on games popularity.
I don't even watch his videos anymore, but I follow him just because he finds like such interesting games to cover. And honestly, I
Right.
think he covers games before they blow up, so he's kind of like really got his finger on the pulse when it comes to like the indie community.
Sure, sure.
So,
Um,
oh, were you
no, go
sorry,
ahead, go ahead.
oh, okay. I was just going to ask, what was it like coming up with all of the factions because there were so many factions I did not expect there to be.
Use the DLC.
I'm sorry?
Did you use the DLC for the game?
No, I haven't used the DLC yet.
Okay, okay, okay. Good thing. Because it brings more factions. Yeah, I mean, do you know Heroes My Magic? Like, just
No, I've never even heard of it.
oh, really interesting. So that's like the base inspiration of the game, and as I mentioned before, like the start of the game was based around the assets that had been made by the artist. So when I started out, everything was laid out for there to be 6 factions. These factions also the ones that are I mean, it's not one-to-one, but it's rather tightly related to the factions in the Heroes of Might and Magic games. From there on out, the 2 next factions were also quite closely tied to those from that game. The the Lament faction was the first one that actually specifically had the artists make like for my project instead of being for everyone. The dwarves, the 10th section also was the first section I did myself. I was doing an update to the game where I wanted to add water content, like being able to sail around the map and pick up stuff on the ocean. So I added in a water-based section. Around the time of the game being released, I was like, I want to do something fun. And I don't know where the idea came from, but I decided to do a China inspired faction. I actually believe that part of the reason was that I talked to someone who was a publisher. I already had found a publisher at this point, but someone else who was working on publishing, and he just mentioned the influence of doing a good not port, that's not the right word, but like campaign for reaching different parts of the world, specifically Asia. And some combination of those two things made me add a China inspired faction. Um, the final faction in the game, Delirium, was actually added by the community. That sounds a bit weird, but for a long time throughout the game's development, people came into the Discord server asking me to do this faction or that faction or that faction, like a frog faction or a laser faction or a something else faction. There were so many different ideas. So I just decided that at some point I would want to do a community design faction. So this Delirium faction actually came down from a vote on a lot of different concepts. Like everyone came into the Discord server coming up with different ideas. I did a little graphic for each, and then we did a vote. We did 2 rounds of voting. I remember the finalists were like a dragon faction or a cursed unit faction or a science fiction faction, stuff like that. But this was the one that won out in the end, and like all the units and all the mechanics were decided on and voted on by the community. So that's just a fun little story.
How did you end up getting the artist initially to join your project and start working with you?
Like Alexander.
Yeah.
I mean, I vaguely remember just. Oh, at this point, actually, he was doing this thing where he wanted people to come up with suggestions for what things he should work on, and I just started there, like communicating with him, and then on Twitter, and he retweeted my stuff, and I talked to him, and it was sort of an organic thing at the beginning, and of course, at that point, the game was rather small, so just him actually promoting it was a big part of some people noticing the game like at all. It grew over time. I never really had a very formal relationship with him. He's a great guy, but I guess he does his own thing most of the time. And increasingly, the art has either been made by myself or various other artists that I have been working with. So at this point, it's actually like a decreasing degree of his work. I think it's only like around 50% of the art in the game that is his. I mean, that's still a lot, but it used to be 100%, so it's a change.
So you started learning how to, like, I guess, mimic his art style to expand your game?
Yeah. Like the first things I did were like literally edits of his stuff, and then I started out drawing my own things more free-handed. Like, of course, I've always been doing a bit of pixel art here and there, but I never really finalized a style before this. And his style is both very, it's amazing. I really love it. It's simple enough, it's minimalistic enough to be very engaging and clear, but also has enough openness for you to be able to come up with rather interesting designs. It's a bit like trying to make a puzzle doing pixel art in that scale. Like it's usually 16x16 or 24x24 pixels, so that's like really small. Each pixel counts, and that makes it way easier to sort of engage with that kind of art creation.
Now, each faction also comes with its own unique building tiers. How did you end up deciding how that would end up working?
So for the longest time during the game's development, up until version 0.8, the game had been a big clone of Heroes of Might and Magic, honestly. And at that point, also, all the factions were basically just reskins of the same thing. Like, each faction had its own units, of course, but that was about the only difference between them. So from version 0.8 and forward, my big thing was trying to do 2 things at once. I wanted to make the factions play as differently from each other as possible. And by doing so, I also wanted to not distance myself, it's not the right word, but sort of create its own identity independent of the mechanics of Heroes of Might and Magic. So in the beginning it was just like one new building per faction, and then a second one, and then a third one. And then for each of the factions which didn't have an engaging enough mechanic, wasn't popular enough with the community, I would add more stuff to it. And it sort of like builds from there, like constantly trying to make all factions equally interesting. And if you continue doing that, at some point, all of them will be interesting, but it will take quite a while. And you'll get quite a lot of weird ideas and mechanics and things pushed into it. Like some things are like most mechanics for the factions ended up being created between version 0.8 and version 1.0. But several things like the Pyre heroes being able to teleport between different mines came up later on during development.
How did you know when the game was ready for the big 1.0 release? Like, how did you know that you felt confident that you're like, this is it, this is the game, it's not an early access, this isn't a beta, this is it?
This is a good question. I remember I kind of just set the date, Actually, I think that was sort of it. I had been doing quite a lot of work on the whole thing of making each faction play very different from each other. I had been doing quite a lot of work, like doing some UI changes and updates and small things like that. And at some point, I was like, I should add fewer things and work more on completing the things that are there. And then I went into my calendar. I thought, I think 5 weeks should be enough. And then I put it down, and that's how that went. Of course, as anyone knows, the development of the game didn't end at version 1.0. Currently, it's at version 2.5, and that's with like 10 major updates between version 1.0 and 2.0. Yeah.
And with a DLC that's out.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How did... Oh, sorry?
Like I actually had sort of a what's it called, a roadmap after doing version 1.0. Had a roadmap of what I wanted to do afterwards for the game to be like complete. But this changed throughout the times. But version 1.0, the big deal was just finishing the first 8 factions, making the game playable and unique and different and interesting for each faction.
And how did you come up with everything you wanted in the overworld map? Because there is just so much stuff to do in the overworld map, from treasure hunting with obelisks to random heroes to fight. There's the sailing. I entered a cave that gave me the option to like mutate my hero into a new type of hero. There's just so much in the overworld.
Following Cloister, wherein you can forsake your mortality to become an undead necromancy.
Yes, yeah. That's the one I found. I was like, okay, we're coming back to this later.
A lot of it has been granted from Heroes of Might and Magic, honestly. But just a lot of it, not all of it, like at all. Several of the things you mentioned, sort of, such as the roaming heroes, like enemy heroes just walking around the place, wanting to be having their butt kicked. It was sort of a thing inspired by Heroes of Might and Magic. Some of the old games sort of did that, but not the same way. And then people in the community asked for it, and I was like, "Hey, how can I do a new spin on this?" I think that's actually been the idea all the way through. Like, how can I do a different spin on things that have already been done, especially when it comes to that content. A lot of it was built up over time. The Following Cloister, of course, as a good example, was something added in the version 1.5 update, where it sort of had some crazy new idea for weird new buildings that I felt important to add. At this point, I think that's enough. That's basically it. But a lot of work has then gone into updating these things, such as you mentioned the treasure seeking. You go to find some obelisks, and then you get like a vision where you have to find some treasure to dig up. It used to be very different. In Heroes of Might and Magic, it was in one way. Then in the first version of it, within the game, it was in a different way, and now it is in a third way. Sort of like iterating upon different ways of achieving the goal of having interesting things to do on the map that don't take too long time, but are engaging nonetheless and different.
And do you feel Heroes Hour has gotten out of the shadow of Heroes of Might and Magic to stand on its own?
I would love if that were the case, and I think in a lot of ways it has, because actually I think about the time that Splattercat covered the game, there was quite a big change in demographic, and after that, I think it's only been like 60 or 70% of the people, the community who actually played Heroes of Might and Magic. Before that, there was way more Heroes of Might and Magic centered. Still to this day, though, it sort of is lumped in the same category. A lot of people, there's some co-influence with the game called Songs of Conquest, which was a new, also a, if I can say so, a new take on the Heroes of Magic genre, with a new spin on it, a different spin than my game took. But there's also been a lot of co-mingling between that community and my community, and through that, there's also been a lot of new people who also know and love Heroes of Might and Magic coming into the community. So it's sort of been changing over time, but I think the biggest part is still like Heroes of Might and Magic stuff, but it's not entirely that, at least, and I feel quite proud of that. For some reason, I feel more proud of a player who has never heard of Heroes of Might and Magic still finding the game interesting than someone who does. Just because then I know it's not nostalgia coming through, but the game actually standing on its own legs.
And how did you decide? How did you? Well, better question. What pushed you to want to add like boat battles in sieges and the different types of battles in Heroes Hour?
Fire for different battles has actually been one of the big desires within the community. A lot of people are coming into the game from sort of a Total War, specifically Warhammer Total War scene, wherein the whole setup of having different units fight each other in unique fashions is rather important. And Heroes Hour has a lot of interactions between units, but it doesn't have a lot of interactions with the battlefield and positioning and stuff like that. So people have been desiring more of that. The naval battles are chaotic, absolutely insane. I don't know how those ended up being the final product, but I really like them for that reason, just because of the absurdity of them. I added in that same update also some battles where you have like very narrow battlefields, like you can fight a dragon in a cave, for instance, where there's very little space and you can bring quite few units, stuff like that. So sort of trying to liven up the basic gameplay of the battle, like the battlefield. The next update actually is also going to focus on the battlefield in a way bigger fashion than anything beforehand, because it's been rather limited. The unit AI, like the code for like making the units go pathfind to the enemies and stuff like that, had quite a lot of issues. So you had to work around that while designing things. But the next update should make that better and also add in more interesting things on the battlefield.
Is there any kind of I guess sneak peek you want to leak on the podcast here about this new update?
I mean, there's a lot of interesting things like the headline features of the new update. But the update is still rather far out, and some of these things will change. It has like an artifact set rework, literally adding in 20 artifacts because I know no restraint. Artifact sets specifically with each a unique bonus. Adds in new ways of using the alternate heroes. Has new battlefields. I am forgetting something. Oh yeah, like 30 new units, stuff like that. But it's going to take a while before it's finished. At this point, I'm kind of going more towards working at a reasonable human pace, opposite of what I've been doing previously. So it will be a while, and it will also take quite a lot of tuning and some iteration, and things won't necessarily end up being the same way that they are now, planned as they are now.
Was there any content that you really wanted it to make into the game but just didn't make the final cut?
Like my first instinct is to say that I know no restraints. If I wanted to add something, I did add it. I um, even if it weren't perfect or finished. But truth be told, there are rather a lot of things that were sort of sidelined. I am having some trouble thinking of one now. Let me just think for a bit. Um, hmm. Oh yeah, I do remember one thing. So in Heroes of Might and Magic, sorry for always referencing the other game. Um, every hero in each faction had their own specialty. It's sort of being represented in the way that each class of hero in each faction has their own class skill that no other kind of hero has. But otherwise, the different heroes sort of play the same way each other. In Heroes Mind Magic, the differences in their skills were rather minor. Like one hero had stronger gargoyles, and another hero had stronger some other unit, and the third one had +1 wood per week or something like that. Very, very strange, like very minor bonuses, but they're really interesting. They gave a lot of flavor to the heroes. So around the time of version 0.8, before I actually finalized the class skill system, I actually had plans for every single hero to get their own special bonus, and I had a long list of them, also in my Excel spreadsheet, like writing out how everything should be. And I had to cut that. I had to be more reasonable. Mostly actually because of balance, I think. Of course, it'd also be a lot of work, but it was just such an insane number of unique mechanics um, that just ended up being thrown by the wayside.
Yeah, I can imagine. You already have like two different classes for all the different factions, then you wanted to make them all have their own unique benefits.
Yes, I know. Like I planned out 48 unique benefits. And like I just sent you an image. I guess you don't have time to see it, but it's just an example of the complexity of some of these. Um, it ended up getting cut. I guess it's for the best. For the best, even though from time to time I do return to this list and think, can I actually do it? Maybe I should do it. It would be fun to do it. Shouldn't I do that?
Oh, you could always make a faction whose benefit is that all the heroes are really different. Small scale.
Why not? Why not? So that's one thing that I regret being cut. I guess a more proper answer is that I ended up cutting the campaign for the game. Originally, it was planned to have a campaign when the game released onto version 2.0, but this never happened.
Was it just too much development costs that would be go into it, or was it just not working out fun wise, or
It was a mix of different things, and I actually think the latter point you bring up, I'm very happy you mentioned that because it's probably the more important one. Um, I am not great at designing campaigns. And like I made a story and I made some campaign like some scenario mechanics like this map you wouldn't get any town to create new units, so you would have to use the units you already had, stuff like that. And it was fine, but between the time that the campaign was starting to be planned and we actually got further into development, the game blew up from being a very small niche indie game to being a, I mean, I guess it's still a niche indie game, but it was a rather well-known niche indie game with like millions of views on YouTube videos. And there was just no way that the expectations of the community would match the size of what's it called? The size of the campaign, the quality of the campaign. Apparently, there's something about the game that people really enjoy. People enjoy playing a lot of maps and trying out different combinations of skills, and it has some strengths, and the campaign just didn't fit those strengths like at all. So, on top of it being more development time, having a lot of issues with the map maker and stuff like that, uh, quality of control would have taken forever. It was just I could not foresee it being a popular thing within the game.
Is that
Also, it
what?
was just miserable working on it. I really hated that time. I became rather upset with working on the game and did everything to work on other things. So that's also part of it.
What, you just didn't like the writing part, or?
Specifically making the maps,
Mm.
adjusting all the things and playtesting it again and again, and adding a couple of more units here and a few more less units there. It was just clunky and frustrating, and I didn't make a procedurally generated turn-based strategy with auto battles to then create single-player linear storytelling maps. Um, like my skill set and the skill set for making campaign are just rather different. I can do it, but it's not my specialty. I'd
Is that
rather focus on my strengths instead, if that makes sense.
is that why there's just so many map variations, is so people can play all the different types of things that they want?
I mean, so it should be mentioned, of course, that all the maps in the game are procedurally generated. So even if you pick the same map twice, it won't actually be the same map. Um, this also means that it sort of has a very basic layout underneath the visual stuff, like how the maps actually are put together. And I think in some way I wanted every single type of combination of nodes and stuff like that to be represented within the list. Um, it's a rather odd list. It's something I'm rather unhappy about, and I plan several reworks of the system. But I guess it's in the end, it's a very easy way to make the game seem like it has more content that it has. I mean, it does have a lot of content, and as in every map is procedural generated. But I could have just made a single map, and every time the map would be completely randomized. But currently, instead, you have like a way too long list of individual sort of important presets that aren't actually that important, different from each other.
With how much content you've been developing post launch, how did you decide what's going to be an update and what's going to be like a DLC?
Um, so the DLC, I planned that around the time that I was finishing up version 2.0. Version 2.0 was also the launch of the 11th faction and the launch on Steam. Um, I really hate finishing things, so while I was doing that, I was also planning out new things I could add in the future. And I guess I just sort of realized that it made more sense to add these new things as a DLC because they would change everything balance-wise as within the game. There's actually been a lot of people coming into the community channels telling me that they think the DLC is cool, but they also maybe even prefer the way the game was before the DLC. And that's perfect because it's a DLC. You can literally go into the options and say, "Hey, I want to play the base game instead." It would restart, and then it would be in the base version instead. So it kind of kept the balance and gameplay of the game in one version over here, and then you have the DLC if you want to play a different version, which is more complex. It's also very important because there's a lot of stuff in the game, and at some point it's too much for a newcomer. I would not recommend newcomers to buy the DLC. It's not so much the complete experience as, oh, I've played this game a lot and I want a new experience. I want things to be weird and confusing once more, and that's the time you should get the DLC instead.
There are a
So
few games that I would not recommend buying all the DLC for. Like, I love RimWorld, but holy hell, I could not imagine trying to do all the DLC on top of the base game.
yeah, Rimworld also did the whole thing where a lot of the more impactful on that to the base game way of playing things, I actually added like in the three updates besides the DLC. I think that's a good way of doing it. But yeah, completely like DLCs for optional content. They're really great because they're optional DLCs for optional content within the game.
But it does also help fund continued development.
Sure.
Which is always a benefit. I like seeing when devs put out DLC because it means they get to keep getting paid for the projects that they keep working on.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really weird system currently where um all the money you get is from when people buy the game the first time. Like there's no increased um, like if you develop a game where you want people to spend hundreds of hours, there's actually no reward for doing that. I mean, that's fine, but it's just a weird system sometimes. A lot of people have asked me if I have like a Patreon or something there so they can support the development of the game, and just I get the drift because it's really weird that you can't really show or like appreciate the game in any other way than paying the same as any other person would. But yeah, it's weird.
And where did you end up getting the music for Heroes Hour?
So the music is made by Lautaro Aurino, who is a musician, composer that I contacted like throughout the development of the game. I think he came onto the project around version 1.2, 1.3. He's also one who's done all the sound effects for the units and a lot of other sound effects throughout the game. So he's responsible for composing all the music, both for battles and for the towns. He's absolutely excellent at doing like rather orchestral and also very indie game chiptune stuff, and that's just a wonderful mix, honestly, when working in this sort of project.
Did you
Um,
give him any direction for like what type of music or sound effects, or is it just kind of like here's the game, make this good?
I mean, we had quite a lot of talks about it back and forth. I also remember he actually did some community outreach, asking people in the community for suggestions of what songs he should be listened to be inspired for various faction themes. So it's been a lot of back and forth. Gave some ideas here and there, but the weirdest thing is he hasn't had a single miss. Like every single time, it's just been a very good fit. Oh, this is not true. There was one point where I suggested changing one piece of music to be different, and then he ended up splitting it into two different music pieces, one for the faction and one for the overworld, and that was the thing. But otherwise, he's been really good at grasping the game, even though well he doesn't have the same background, of course, but he still managed to do it.
I will say this one might be one of my favorite OSTs. I really enjoyed listening to just the music while playing all the different factions because I never finished a campaign because I would be like, oh, that was a cool faction I just fought. Let me restart the map into another faction.
Mm-hmm.
I think my favorite were the people who just like summoned demons and built their whole thing around like demon magic and everything. I thought that was like probably my favorite faction.
Oh, right, right. I think maybe if you'd be so inclined, it would be cool if you shared a link to the OST on YouTube or something like that when you do your thing.
Oh yeah, at the end I'll ask whatever links you want, but yeah, I could definitely do that.
Would be cool. I
So
really think that he needs more exposure. Like I'm also paying the guy. It shouldn't sound like that, but it's really good stuff. Um, like talking about inspiration stuff. Like actually, the game had music before he joined the project. Like for each faction, it was made by my at that point roommate. Very local stuff. Who of course did know the Heroes of Might and Magic game. So it's sort of been also he took a bit of inspiration from that guy's work too. But at this point, it's wholly his own thing, and it's just wonderful. Personally, I really adore the Chinese theme, like the theme for the Pillar faction specifically.
that's been the main
It's
faction I've been trying to finish that campaign, but I can't.
like,
Every time I cross the water, I get into the water faction with the boats, and yeah. But so I know that faction pretty well.
mm-hmm.
So Benjamin, what games have you been playing?
Oh, little old me. What I've been playing. I'm literally jumping to my what's it called? Uh, Desktop just to see what's up there. Recently I haven't been playing a lot of video games, so it's mostly just sometimes if I'm feeling a bit like that, I jump into something. One thing I've been going through is that I spent quite a lot of time in though has been a game called Settlement Survival. Do you by any chance know of the game Banished?
Yes, I do.
it was really huge, like 10, 15 years ago. I don't even know at this point. So Settlement Survival is sort of it's the same game, just different and more complex and has more stuff. So it's really great if you have played Banished and you enjoyed Banished. I would really recommend giving it a try.
Huh, I might have to because I'm really big into city builders. That might be one of my favorite genres.
Right.
But you said
So
this
that's all.
is similar to Banish because that's such a lovely art style. I'd hate to see everyone perish from the cold and starvation.
I mean, it's the first year of the game is basically the same as Banished, and then from that point on, it just becomes Banished, but way more complex. It kind of reminds me of some of the mods that were made for Banished, actually. Just working way better, of course. Um, the same way that you might end up losing the game if you do not have any toolsmiths in Banished. You will lose the game here if you don't have any churches or guys who make baskets or guys who make shoes and guys who do blah 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 blah. So it's a very a much more complex simulation. This
How does
technology
society
behind and stuff
collapse
like
from
that.
a lack of churches?
Because there's a happiness and that's also a thing in Banished, like happiness and health. But in this game, it actually matters. If your citizens are unhappy, they will be tired quicker, and it's not quite visible, but it's will make your society crumble over time if they become unhappy, because then they work more slowly and you get fewer things, and you don't have any enough people to do all the things they have to do, and then they become even more unhappy, and then people die. But if they can go to church, they will become happier. I don't like the bonuses in Banished are rather vague what they actually do, but here it's very concrete. Like you put it down a church, and all the houses within a specific circular range get plus 15% happiness or something like that.
I've been playing a lot of City Skylines in preparation for
Mm.
the sequel. I don't know. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh, I am. It never really grabbed me, but I'm excited to see what happens with the sequel.
That one.
I mean,
Oh, sorry.
I think it's a very very interesting comparison because City Skylines is a wonderful simulation to outlive your creative wishes. Whereas compared to Banished, it's a very concrete thing. Like you can either succeed or fail at Banished. You succeed if people live, and you fail if people die. In City Skylines, it's always a bit more vague if it's a good system or a bad one.
That is true. Um, to have anything
You've been
actually.
playing City Skylines in a way where you actually ended up having people die.
The only way you do that is like if you're really, really bad at the game, like you put the water pump taking water from the sewer outlet. Like that's gonna kill everyone. but it's
So that's a bit more basic. What are you looking forward to in the sequel?
well, a sequel for City Skylines. I don't really know. Like it's funny when they announced the sequel, I was in my head. I was like, what else could you add? But apparently they're gonna add mixed zoning, which is really important, especially in real cities. So mixed zoning will kind of be like you have like some suburbs, some commercial, and even like some dense apartments kind of mixed together in a zone. And City Skylines doesn't do that. You just have high density, low density, and commercial. In real life, it's important to have a nice, healthy mixture of that because you want to be able to have apartment buildings be next to commercial areas, and not everyone wants an apartment, so you need to have your suburbs kind of sprawled. So I think that's going to actually make the gameplay quite interesting. As well as one thing I love about city builders is it kind of advocates in a lot of ways for better city planning. Like City Skylines, once you get to like the traffic buildup, it starts to implicitly advocate for the fact that we should have better public transit. And I feel like by having mixed zoning, it can also be advocating for mixed zoning in real life too, which is really important because coming from Florida, it sucks where it's just a giant urban sprawl in the suburbs and it takes you like 20 minutes to get out of the suburbs just to hit somewhere where you can hit a commercial area, and if you don't have a car you just can't afford to live there.
Right. Should mention that U.S. city zoning is notoriously awful, to the degree that I, over here in Europe, also know of this being a bad thing,
Yeah,
not a
I
universal thing.
that in Europe is notorious for having roundabouts, which oh man, whenever they put them in, like the first like month, people drive through the roundabout because they don't understand it.
I know that in City Skylines, like the roundabout is a wonderful thing, but coming from the land of roundabouts, I will not agree on this point. They're really weird, are very often useless. I used to live in the capital, but these days I live down in Ural, Denmark, and it's just it's so many roundabouts where there's literally no traffic like most of the day, and just feels such a waste.
I think I've seen studies in high traffic areas, roundabouts are really good and reduce car accidents, except when implemented in the United States, they have an early period where they cause more car accidents because people don't understand them.
Right. I mean, I'm fine with having them when there's actually, traffic, but the issue is when you have this like 1 kilometer of straight countryside road, and then there's a roundabout and no cars, and then another kilometer and another roundabout. I mean, I guess we need a balance somewhere between what we do over here and what you do over there, where you apparently are afraid of them.
At least with empty roundabouts, you can just like drive in a big circle really fast and not worry about anything.
Really fast. I would not recommend this.
Well, maybe that's why so many people drove through the roundabout in my state.
Exactly.
I had a friend, he was like, "Oh, I love roundabouts because they just put one in my neighborhood." I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Because I get to do this," and he just sped up and ran through it. I was like, "Why?"
The whole point of them is that you have to slow down, though. That's a good thing about them. They make people think a bit more.
Ah, we
Yeah.
just put speed bumps everywhere.
Sure.
But so any other games you've been playing?
Mostly it's been like replaying old games. Diablo 4 came out recently,
Oh
and I
yeah.
was like, should I shell out the $70 for this game? And I ended up deciding against it, but trying to reopen Diablo 3 and like did that for a couple of days. Yeah, but I think that's mostly the loop I'm stuck in. I keep replaying old games, even when it comes to the game it developed. It's also based on old games, so I feel like I'm sort of just a. I've come to the point in my life where I will experience nothing new, and everything will just be a repetition of what has come prior.
That's the game that's hooked me the most recently. I've been playing it obsessively is
Hmm.
Temtem, and it's just Pokemon.
Oh, right. I yeah. What was? Yeah. How is it? How do you like it?
Well, it does some things different enough that because like my problem with Pokemon is that like one I can beat the whole game with like one Pokemon that I just hit
Oh
max
yeah,
level.
that's so silly. Very silly. Yeah.
But also it's like they throw out a fire type and it's like, oh cool, I threw out water type. Victory. Um
Hmm.
Temtem does some stuff that they do two things differently. All the battles are 2v2. So now it
Oh right.
becomes like, okay, that guy has a water type, but he also has an electric type. So I
Mm.
can't throw out a type to counter his water because then the electrical counter. So now I have to think of a different like combo to not get. So there's a lot more effects happening. Like you can have someone to help counteract your weakness, and that makes more complex decision making. But also, there's a stamina system. You can only really do about 3 moves, I've noticed, um, before your Temtem are out of stamina, and then you have to wait for them to regain it. Which means you're constantly cycling in your Temtem, and that prevents you from ever really getting in a situation where it's just like, I threw out the one guy and I beat everyone with the one guy.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Like,
So,
I really enjoy the whole genre of Pokemon stuff. And also have tried my hand at different other spin-offs. I was about to say like Coromon and stuff like that. Um, the point I always come to is that the same things that you mentioned, of course, but also the whole thing where it just takes forever. Like a single battle isn't that long, but battle after battle after battle just ends up taking such a long time to get anywhere.
It still has that problem. I'm waiting for someone to make a Pokemon game that like doesn't have the random battles in the grass constantly pop up. That annoys me to no end. But we'll see. I
I mean, you're literally talking about real Pokemon at this point. For the last couple of games, that's really been the whole thing of trying to make people not have wild encounters as such.
that
Did you try the new Scarlet and Violet stuff?
No, I haven't. I did hear Arceus did like mix things up completely in that regard, but I did
Yeah.
also see that Sword and Shield did not.
Oh yeah. Well, they had the whole thing where you could see the Pokemon, you can decide if you want to engage them or not. Uh, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, of course, didn't have wild battles at all. You could only catch wild Pokemon like by doing the Pokemon Go thing. Um, I really enjoy the idea that after having this series that's been completely the same for like decades, all throughout my life, always being the same gameplay concept, they actually have been trying to mix up things throughout the last several years, ever since Pokemon Go became popular. I'm really infatuated with the idea of like iterative design, like trying one thing, seeing how that works, and then trying a different. And it feels like they've done that for the last several Pokemon games. Um, it doesn't seem that people are too happy with it, but honestly, it should be applauded after having a series where people for decades have complained about it being the same thing again and again.
Well, I was gonna say that's even though I guess you could say that there's nothing new in terms of like genres that sometimes we go back to, just these little
Mhm.
iterative changes are like a big deal because it almost gives you a better understanding of the genre that you're playing when you make like a little change and it opens it up a little more. Is Discord cutting out again? Benjamin.
Hello,
There we go.
you're back.
Yes, I don't know what happened.
You went to the land of high-pitched voices and silence.
Oh, bad Wi-Fi. Got it. All right, I'll just edit all this out.
Please repeat your point in a concise manner because I have no idea what to say.
I was just saying I like when you can like when you make small changes to genres
Mhm.
that we've already played. It gives you a better
Right,
understanding of those genres.
right. Good point, yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I recently tried to get into on that point into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Like I was really happy with the whole concept of doing auto battles and just throwing your Pokemon out to engage with the wild Pokemon. But it's just it's a really good idea to try to do the wild battles differently, but I don't think they found the solution yet. It's literally just one Pokemon goes up to the other and either it wins or it loses, and that's all. I mean, this is not engaging gameplay. We want something a bit more uh, juicy. I'd
I
love it if Temp 2, if I can suggest such a thing, would work on the same concept, but also try to tackle the thing that Pokemon finally is tackling. It really feels like the other Pokemon-inspired games don't really do anything about the whole thing of turn-based battles just being way too long.
I will say they currently I think they've just released Temtem Showdown, which is like a free to play. It's just the fights. That's all it is, and like you get your I don't know how the progression system works, but if you want to skip the campaign and the open world and everything, and you just want to fight, I guess there's a free to play version now.
I That's really cool. I guess that means you can get into the competitive side of things. But as a person who never really played the games because of the competitive side, but the whole team building and leveling up side of things, it'd be cool to have something that's not literally not having the gameplay, which I guess it is when you do a version like that.
That's fair.
I
For
feel
me,
very complainy though. Sorry about that.
it's not a big deal. I'm not that interested in it because I play these games for the exploration. I like discovering and collecting all the Pokemon Temtem, what are they called. But I like
Oh.
I like walking into every building and interacting with the NPCs and their bizarre dialogue. I like exploring the new cities. I like doing all that kind of stuff. And to remove all that, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not that interested now.
Yeah, and it's an absolutely wonderful looking game. Like the art design and the world design, more like is just excellent.
Oh.
Maybe I should actually give it a try instead of just being a sour puss about it. Not
Ev-
to bring it back to my own game again, but like I find this whole area extremely fascinating because that's really been the big pickle I've been trying to work on for such a long time is like how to make turn-based stuff faster and more engaging instead of just skipping it. Um, so that's just a fun little parallel between this conversation and the prior.
well, I hate games that have auto battle systems. And I don't mean like yours. I mean like you know when you play a phone game and you can just like there was an MMO I remember and you could literally just be like you could press auto and it would just you would automatically walk to the NPC, like it would automatically walk you where you're going, and every time a battle took place it would automatically play for you. And I'm like, why am I here? What am I humanly doing to like
Hilarious. This is
to,
hilarious.
to actually
Do you
like
remember what the MMO was?
no, I don't. It might have been a Bleach MMO, like the anime Bleach.
Oh,
But I remember hearing about this like a decade ago. But like, there's a lot of phone games that do stuff like that, where it's just like the auto battle. It isn't like
yeah.
your auto battle, where it's about the gameplay's about either having things and tools to mix up the battle, or it's about the setup beforehand, and it's just we need to pad the game, but the players are gonna fall off because of the padding. So we're gonna give them a way to just skip it, but they still have to wait because we need to time gate them. If that makes any sense.
It's like you have this concept for a game, but you don't have an engaging gameplay, so you try to work your way around it. What's your opinion on clicker games?
Auto clickers.
Stuff like Cookie Clicker, or like what's a game where you have a lot of like a Steam game where you level up a variety of heroes, like Clicker Heroes, I actually think it's called. Stuff like that.
I like them, but I have ADHD,
Hmm.
so it's one of those things where I'm just like, I feel like a hamster that is staring at the water bottle, knowing that it is laced with cocaine, and I'm like, I love it. Like that's what it feels like. I just know that I am stuck in a loop, and I just eventually I'll break out, and I'm very deterred away from them because of that. Um,
Wonderful. Like it's so candid, it's so genuine, it's so transparent. Like the thing you were describing before, the MMO where you could just have your hero, your player, do all the things for you. That's the opposite. Like it's just hiding away that it's actually this very simple gameplay system in the crux of things. I cannot help but appreciate the auto clicker nature, like the clicker game nature of just being this is the gameplay, this is what you want, isn't it? It sort of spurs a lot of interesting conversation about what even is the point of a game. Like when is the theme the load bearing part of the game, and when is the gameplay the load bearing thing?
That's an interesting question because there are definitely moments in Temtem that get stale, like as the random battles, or you just gotta everyone has to stop you in battle on the way to the thing you want. But like the music in that game is so charming, and like the way everything is presented art wise, and it's just I love running around in the game, even if sometimes the gameplay doesn't immediately catch me the way that like the dojo battles do, because those are actually like really intense.
Right, but I guess that's actually like a third thing, like a third pillar, like the immersion pillar. So like you have the gameplay pillar, you have the immersion pillar, and the theme pillar. I think I should try to explain the idea of the theming a bit more. Um, can I tell you a story about a video game called
Called what?
Game that came out like, yeah, 15 years ago at this point? It's rather simple, but you take control of a small team of game developers and you make them make video games, and the video games get like a score, and then you make some money, and then you make a new video game, and it's just this like repeated over and over. It's on one hand, it's a really good game. on the other hand, it's a really, really bad game. And honestly, it's very difficult to like try to tell people why it's a good game because most of what it is like this Skinner box. It's just clicking buttons. The interface is rather clunky and it's difficult to give tasks to the different people who are working on the game. But the thing that made this game so popular is the theme of it. It's the story you tell yourself while you're playing it. That you are making a video production company, and of course it's a video game, so video game players are just in love with this concept. It's just what we've always wanted a game to be about. And it sounds very easy to say that it's all about the theme of the game, like the story, but the gameplay itself also really meshes together with the theme. Like the gameplay is awful and boring, but it enhances the idea of you're doing this and you will not know if the next game will work or not. You can see the numbers go up throughout the game. And they mesh together so well that even though the gameplay is awful, the game is still good just because of the story it's trying to tell. Um, the music is terrible, the graphics are terrible, so it's not because you're immersed in the world of this thing. I feel extremely rude at this point. Um, but it's this thing. I've been thinking a lot about it again when I was developing Heroes Hour because I think to a large degree the most there's some interesting gameplay, especially with combining different mechanics. But I think the most powerful part of the game Heroes Hour is the story that you're telling yourself of starting a level 1 hero on day 1, and you're creating an army and you're choosing skills to make him stronger, and you can see that you become more and more powerful. Like, I actually think that gameplay of Heroes Hour isn't the auto battles, all the decisions you're making. The gameplay of Heroes Hour is the theme of taking someone from nothing to something great, and taking a town and a kingdom from nothing to something great, and then repeating it ad nauseum.
That's kind of how I view Heroes Hour, where the battles are like essentially they're just the consequences of like everything that's built up to that moment.
Mm-hmm. It's a way of making concrete what you have achieved. It's a way of communicating in a chunky, like you can sense it in your headphones and on the screen, like the impact of the things you have achieved.
If you want a game to research, there's a game, and I implore anyone listening to look up the game Cruelty Squad. It is fucking disgusting. Um, in terms of its art style, it is hideous. One of the textures is just a wall of Funko Pops, but dropped and bit crunched in low res, and everyone calls them Chunko Pops, and it's the funniest shit imaginable. It is disgusting to look at, but the theme of the game is essentially is a futuristic hellscape nightmare of capitalism. And in that regard, the hideousness of the art style meshes with like the brutality and disgust that is the world and the gameplay that you're playing as, because you're like a hitman. And it's just such a like I haven't played it, but from what I've heard from a lot of reviewers is that like they almost can't look away from the car crash that is Cruelty Squad, as well as the message that it's trying to send, that only sends it by looking as revolting as it is intentionally, and that like to reload you have to like flick the mouse kind of thing, which makes it like even weirder. It's a very bizarre game, but that's kind of like the theme that they were going for, is that like by living in like a capitalist hellscape it feels so surreal, and so they wanted to create art that reflects that, and I think that's just such a bizarre fucking idea.
I also like the idea of actually sometimes doing things that are clunky and make the gameplay worse just to make the thing more, again, like impactful, as you said with the whole reloading thing.
There are definitely games that do very well at that. There's something to be said about I feel like as devs, like we get so sidetracked on trying to make the player's experience as in this way immersive, where like we want the player to never like be stopped. We want to give them as many tools to ease them into the game as possible, and yet sometimes for story purposes you don't want to do that. You just want to jar them with something that fucking hurts.
Right. Like it's about we desire streamlining the gameplay experience, but streamlining is really taking a lot of things away, simplifying things, and maybe these things shouldn't be simplified always.
And that's that.
I guess that's also what made it so that not only that you could take this MMO and put it on autoplay, but the MMO already was so streamlined that even automating it was a possible concept.
Pretty much, but I just thought of Suicide Squad when you're talking about that other game. Also, the audio cut out. What was the name of the game that you're talking about, where it's the gameplay's not good, but it simulates being
Oh
a
no!
dev quite well?
Oh no! It's called Game Dev Tycoon.
See, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that was the name and it wasn't something else.
It's made by Green Heart Games.
Fun
Video game
fact
developers.
about that game: if you pirate it and you get a specific
Mm-hmm.
pirated copy, your studio will go bankrupt around a certain day because everyone keeps pirating your game.
Yeah, they're actually rather genius. They did a couple of things to make this game so well known, and that's one of them. It actually
Really?
drew more publicity than most other things because it's a really good story to tell to video game journalists. So they're going to make articles about your game, and then afterwards you can have people do videos and stuff like that. So that
Oh,
was a big thing that actually made it popular.
those
It's a really weird.
clever sons of bitches.
Yeah, they're also like if you played without having pirated it, at some point throughout the game they will have a small pop-up saying, "Hey, thank you for playing our games. We're called Greenheart Games, blah blah blah, and we really appreciate your support," stuff like that. So they're really doing a lot of things to like position themselves in this very heart-to-heart relationship with the people who are playing it, which is hilarious, taking the concept of the game into consideration. Like they're simulating a game dev studio, and while they're doing that, they're simulating a relationship with the pirates who are going to pirate the game, and also with the people who are actually going to buy the game, planning these things out. It's sort of ingenious.
And then there's the devs of Postal who took the complete opposite approach, where they were like, fuck key resellers, fuck G2A, here's the link to pirate our game if you can't afford it.
Mhm. I appreciate that. A lot of people are coming through the Discord server about the whole thing, pirating stuff. There's actually a lot of sites where you can pirate the game. I don't think it's as rampant now as it was earlier. Like before it came on onto Steam, it used to be really bad. But yeah, like the whole piracy thing, I feel like we're not talking about this as much anymore, just because it's always been the case that the easiest way to combat piracy was to have easy, accessible platforms to get the video games, and that's what we do have now.
That and like, there are two types of pirates: people who weren't going to play your game in the first place because they don't want to pay. So they're not, even if you made the piracy like impossible, they just wouldn't play it. And people who are too broke to play the game, which again, if you made piracy illegal, they still wouldn't play your game. Like, those are people who won't, like, pirates will never buy your game often enough because they
Yeah,
don't want to. You're not losing any sales technically.
exactly. That's also why there's a free version of the game available on, like, it's not a full version, but a free demo version available too. Um, that used to be important to also get people onto the game.
Oh yeah, I
On that
remember.
topic, there actually is like a third category of people, like Russians, or like people from China, that don't actually have access to using Steam in the normal way. So those are also forced to get it in that fashion.
I completely forgot that so many servers were shutting down in Russia because of the war. That
Mm.
people, like, that piracy is like skyrocketing in that country right now.
I mean, it was always high, but it's become worse. The game was literally released like on Steam 3 days after the war broke out, so it's been a bit of a thorn in the side, and the Russian part of the community just hasn't been the same way since, um,
Mm,
understandably.
unfortunate, but you know, hopefully if things work out, those people, because some pirates when they get the money will come around. I played RimWorld pirated when I was in high school and fell in love with it so much that I went and bought the full version like years later. But
strange anecdote, but I remember at some point, like generally, I feel quite fine about people pirating games, even the one I spent blood, sweat, and tears making. The game, even the one I spent time working on. But one sorry is the person who came into the Discord server saying he had pirated the game, like quite proud about it, I guess. I think he was looking for like a reaction from me or something like that. I was like, fine, and he'd spent like 20 hours and enjoyed it a lot, but there were like this, and that thing that he wanted to have changed, and if I did that, he would consider buying the game. And it didn't quite sit right with me, though.
That sounds like the people that go to restaurants and like complain that the food's bad, but they eat it all to get it comped. Like that's just like that's next level ass hattery. That's terrible.
Exactly. There's also a few like Steam reviews which are really fun about people who have played the game for like 30 hours over there and then found out the game wasn't good enough for the liking, and it's just like I'm so proud you spent 30 hours on the game. Like this is a small project by a single, well, kind of solo indie dev. So it's just really cool that you went so far. People have very high expectations these days. And I'm very happy to not always meet them. I just wish they would also take a bit of learning from that point, that if they always are disappointed, maybe to adjust those expectations at some point.
It's it's complicated because like I feel like you should have high expectations for like AAA devs, well, AAA companies, because if you're gonna make millions and you're gonna put out this product and you're gonna charge so much, you should be like the high standard, you know. Um, That's clearly not the case with indie developers. They are two very different sides of the coin. Very different. Um,
I don't know, like in some way, I'm a bit gameplay centric in that way. I don't really care if a game is good or not. I care much more about it being, well, I guess, fun. Like I was about to say having good gameplay, but it's not really about that. It's about spending time in it and not leaving in disgust. I mean, something like the complaints about bugginess in games, and I know that it's rather impactful for people who are expecting like a very high quality product, but at the end of the day, if you have a video game that's great to play, and throughout 30 hours you have spent 10 minutes dealing with various bugs and issues, maybe that's fine. I don't know. This is very controversial, I know.
it's fair, I think.
Just
But I think that's a wrap on the podcast, Benjamin. While I have you here, is there anything you want to shout out? Any links or, you know, local pizza place? Anything?
as we talked about before, actually, I think it'd be cool if you could share the link to the OST of the video game Heroes Hour on YouTube. There's like a playlist with all the songs. They're amazing, and as mentioned, they're made by my good pal, that I just forgot the name of. That's very terrible. Lautaro Arino. So I think you should shout out those. Apart from that, no, no, I think that's about it. Oh well, anyone who wants to look at Heroes of Might and Magic, like the original games, it might be a quaint study in weird game design from the past. They're a very weird mix of being overdeveloped on some parts and very underdeveloped on others. So could also be fun. It seems to be rather a new thing to the current group of people. I also know that the game never went that popular over in the States, so that could be a fun thing to look into. But I think that's about it.
Well, there we go. I'm gonna have all the links in the description. Y'all know the like, subscribe, bell, jazz. All right, see y'all on the next episode. Bye.